Tonight's story is about the very first time that war was ever fought. It wasn't on a battlefield of dirt and stone, but in a perfect place made of light. It's the story of a harmony so beautiful it filled all of creation, and the one proud note that chose to break it. This is the echo of the fight that we still feel today. The reason a shadow touches everything beautiful in the world. It's a comfort to know we're all lying here in the quiet, trying to make sense of the light and dark in our own lives. If this story helps you find a little peace in that struggle, feel free to like or subscribe. And please let me know in the comments what time it is where you are. It's nice to know who else is awake under the same old sky. Chapter 1. The Serenity of Heaven. In the beginning, there was only harmony, a symphony of light and sound woven into the very fabric of existence. Heaven was a realm of impossible beauty, where rivers of liquid starlight flowed between meadows of crystallized praise, and the air itself hummed with the perpetual, joyful resonance of divine order. Here, in this flawless expanse, every being had a purpose, a note to sing in the eternal chorus. Among the most radiant was Lucifer, the light-bearer, whose very form was sculpted from the dawn of creation. His wings, vast and shimmering, cast prismatic patterns across the celestial plains, and when he moved, it was as if a new constellation had been born. He stood beside the archangel Michael, a being of steadfast strength and unwavering loyalty, whose presence was like a mountain, immovable, eternal, and foundational to the peace they all enjoyed. The angels moved in a graceful, preordained ballet, their tasks a form of worship. Some tended to the gardens of singing flowers whose petals opened to release harmonies that sustained the cosmos. Others wove the threads of fate under God's guidance, their hands moving in silent, perfect rhythm. Lucifer's role was to channel the pure, undiluted light from the throne, distributing it throughout the spheres, so that no corner of heaven would ever know shadow. He performed this duty with a breathtaking elegance that made the other celestials pause in admiration. Yet, within that flawless execution, a subtle shift had begun, a quiet dissonance in the grand symphony. During a gathering at the Sapphire Gates, a convocation of the highest orders to reflect the glory of their Creator, the fragility of this perfect peace was first tested. Thousands of angels assembled, their collective light forming a single, brilliant sun of adoration. Michael stood at the forefront, his gaze one of humble reverence, his entire being focused outward in service. But Lucifer, positioned at the center of the assembly, seemed to draw the light inward. As the ambient luminescence of the realm intensified in response to their collective praise, so too did Lucifer's own radiance. It was not merely a reflection, it was an amplification that felt, for the first time, personal. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips as he observed the lesser angels averting their eyes from his splendor. His posture, always one of noble grace, seemed to straighten further, as if he were not merely a bearer of light, but its very source. He held a note in the celestial song a fraction of a moment longer than was his part, a subtle declaration of his own magnificence that rippled through the harmonic fabric. Michael, ever vigilant, felt the ripple not as sound, but as a tremor in the spirit, a fleeting chill in a realm that had never known cold. He glanced at his brother, but the moment passed, the harmony restored as if the dissonance had never been. The gathering continued, a spectacle of pure innocence and joy, yet the seed had been sown. The perfect serenity of heaven, for the first time since its founding, held its breath, its peace now as delicate as the surface of a still, deep lake waiting for the first stone to fall. Chapter 2. The first doubt, the celestial gathering ended, its final harmonies fading into the golden silence of the eternal realm, but within Lucifer a new and discordant music had begun to play. He retreated from the chorus of his brethren, his magnificent wings carrying him to a secluded spire of amethyst that overlooked the sea of glass. Here, far from the adoring gazes and the collective worship, he was alone with the most intoxicating of companions, his own reflection. The sea below, calm and perfectly clear, showed him not just his form, but an image of such staggering beauty that it seemed to him a truth in itself. He was the light-bearer, the morning star, his glory woven from the very essence of the divine. As he gazed, the thought that had been a whisper at the gathering now roared into a conviction. This splendor was not a gift to be wielded in service. It was a right, a state of being that deserved its own throne. His internal struggle was a silent, violent storm. Envy, a concept previously unknown in heaven, coiled around his heart like a serpent of shadow. He watched the distant, unwavering light of the throne, the source from which all light, including his own, originally flowed. A corrosive ambition began to burn within him. Why should he, who reflected such perfection, be merely a reflection? Why should he channel a light that was not his to command? The divine order, once the foundation of his existence, now felt like a chain, a hierarchy designed to keep him in a place of subservience. He saw Michael's humble loyalty not as a virtue, but as a blindness, an inability to see the potential for a grander, more equal cosmos where power was shared, not merely received. This burgeoning arrogance demanded an audience, a single sympathetic ear to validate the heresy taking root in his soul. He sought out Azazel, an angel of profound intellect and curiosity, one who had often pondered the deeper mysteries of creation with him. They met within a grove of trees, with leaves of beaten silver, their quiet rustle the only sound. Lucifer's discontent, once a private turmoil, now found its voice. He did not speak in shouts or demands, but in a low, compelling tone that wove his grievances into a tapestry of perceived injustice. He spoke of his own unmatched radiance, of the creative power he felt coursing through him, and questioned why such a being should bow to any will but its own. He painted a vision of a heaven, not of servitude, but of partnership, where the most glorious of its children stood as equals beside the Creator. His words were not a plea, but a declaration, revealing a pride so profound it had convinced itself it was reason. Azazel listened, his own mind a whirlwind of new dangerous possibilities, as the first doubt, now given voice, began to spread its dark wings. Chapter 3. The Whisper of Rebellion. The grove of silver leaves became a crucible for a new and dangerous fire. Lucifer's words, once spoken, did not dissipate, but clung to the celestial air like a contagion, finding fertile ground in the subtle discontents of a select few. He moved through the outer spheres of heaven with a new purpose, no longer the dutiful light-bearer, but a seeker of kindred spirits, his radiant presence now a beacon for whispered grievances and unspoken ambitions. He sought out those angels whose brilliance felt constrained by their roles, whose curiosity about the boundaries of their existence had been piqued but never satisfied. In the shadowed alcoves behind waterfalls of liquid diamond and within the hollows of silent orbiting stars, he held his clandestine assemblies. The most significant of these gatherings took place deep within the labyrinth of echoes, a place where the harmonies of heaven were muted and distorted into faint, ghostly whispers. Here, beneath an archway of obsidian that drank the light, Lucifer stood before a host of the disgruntled. Their faces, once serene, were now etched with a new and intoxicating emotion, the thrill of forbidden discourse. Lucifer did not command them, he captivated them. His rhetoric was a masterwork of persuasion, a symphony of half-truths and poisoned logic. He spoke not of overthrowing the divine, but of achieving the fullness of their potential. He painted God's love as a cage, his order as a limitation on their glorious individual might. He was the champion of their suppressed sovereignty, offering them not rebellion, but a glorious awakening. His voice, smooth as polished onyx, wove a vision of a heaven remade, a kingdom where they would no longer be servants but co-regents, their power unleashed and their wills unchained. He pointed to his own splendor as proof of what they could become, a living argument that they were being held back from their true destiny. The corruption was not a violent seizure, but a slow, seductive turning. He twisted their love for the Creator into a narrative of neglect, their joy and service into a story of subjugation. One by one, he watched the light of pure devotion in their eyes flicker and be replaced by the harder, colder fire of ambition. The clandestine assembly was no longer a meeting of malcontents. It was the plotting chamber of a nascent army, the first strategic move in a war not yet declared. The pristine air of the labyrinth grew thick with the heat of conspiracy, the whispers of rebellion coalescing into a silent, unified purpose that stood in direct defiance of the celestial harmony they had once sworn to uphold. Chapter 4. Michael's Perception. A shiver, cold and alien, ran through the foundations of heaven. It was not a sound, nor a shift in the light, but a tremor in the spirit, a fracture in the seamless tapestry of divine harmony. Michael, standing watch at the borders of the Empyrean, felt it first. His entire being was a tuning fork for the celestial order, and the dissonance struck him with the force of a physical blow. The eternal music, which had always flowed through him as a river of pure peace, now carried a single, jarring note, a whisper of pride that curdled into ambition, a shadow of discord that marred the perfect symphony. He turned his gaze inward across the sprawling, luminous realms, his perception piercing through the layers of reality. He saw no overt conflict, no broken gates or dimmed stars, but he felt the sickness nonetheless. It was a spiritual poison, subtle and spreading, its source emanating from the very heart of what was once most glorious. His duty was as intrinsic to him as his own wings, and without hesitation he sought the source of all clarity. He ascended through the concentric spheres of light, past choirs of angels who sang in blissful ignorance of the gathering storm, until he stood before the unapproachable radiance of the throne. Here, in the silent, overwhelming presence of God, the dissonance was both magnified and explained. He did not need to voice his concern. The knowledge was imparted to him in a wave of profound sorrow and infinite foreknowledge. The rebellion was not a future possibility. It was a present reality, festering in the secret places of heaven. Lucifer, his brother, the most radiant of them all, had become the vessel for this corruption. The warning was not one of alarm, but of grim inevitability. Conflict, born of pride and nurtured by deceit, was rushing toward them like a star hurtling from its firmament. Michael's nature, forged in loyalty and steadfastness, did not buckle under the weight of this revelation. Instead, it hardened into a singular, unyielding purpose. The peace he had guarded for eons was threatened, and his role as defender snapped into sharp, painful focus. He felt no rage toward Lucifer, only a profound and grieving resolve. His love for his brother was a deep, enduring part of him, but his duty to the divine will was the core of his very existence. One could not be allowed to compromise the other. As he received his charge, a quiet solemnity settled upon him. The time for serene vigilance was over. The time for preparation had begun. He turned from the throne, his form seeming to grow in stature, not with pride, but with the heavy mantle of responsibility. The coming storm would not be averted, for free will had chosen its path. His purpose was now to stand against the tempest, to become the shield of heaven and the sword of its judgment. The first chapter of innocence was closed, and the long, dark chapter of celestial war was about to be written, with Michael, duty-bound and resolute, poised at its precipice. Chapter 5. The Council of Light. The summons was not a sound, but a shift in the very gravity of heaven, a silent call that resonated in the core of every loyal spirit. From the farthest meadows of crystallized praise to the highest spires overlooking the sea of glass, the faithful angels felt the divine imperative and turned as one. The Empyrean, the highest heaven where light was not seen but known, became their gathering place. They assembled not as a chaotic host, but in ordered ranks that reflected the harmony they still cherished. Their collective light, a subdued, solemn glow against the oppressive spiritual gloom that had begun to seep into the realm. At the center of it all was the unspoken presence of God, a profound silence that held more weight than any thunder, a sorrow that permeated the celestial air like a fine mist. Michael stood before the gathered multitude, his gaze sweeping over the faces of his brethren. He saw not the unblemished joy of the last great convocation, but a mosaic of apprehension, confusion, and grim determination. The perfect peace they had known was a memory now, shattered by the betrayal festering in their midst. Then the divine will manifested not in a voice, but as a clear, undeniable knowledge planted in the mind of every angel present. Michael, the steadfast, the unwavering, was appointed defender of heaven. The title was not an honor, it was a burden of immeasurable weight, a command to raise a sword against his own kin. All eyes turned to him, the expectation a tangible pressure. His acceptance was a study in humility. He did not straighten with pride or flash a triumphant gaze. Instead, he bowed his head, his magnificent wings folding inward in a gesture of profound submission. The light around him did not blaze with new-found power, but seemed to draw inward, solidifying into an aura of unshakable resolve. There was no boast, no promise of easy victory, only a silent, solemn acknowledgment of the dreadful duty he now bore. His loyalty, tested by the impending schism, did not waver for an instant. It became the bedrock upon which the defense of heaven would be built. He was their shield, and the realization brought not comfort, but a chilling finality to the assembly. Around him, the reactions of the other angels were as varied as their forms. Some, like Gabriel, met Michael's gaze with a fire of their own, their resolve hardening in the face of the coming conflict. Others trembled, their luminous forms flickering with a fear they had never before known, fear of battle, fear of pain, and most terribly, fear of facing former brothers and friends in combat. Whispers of anxiety rustled through the ranks, questions about the strength of the rebels, the extent of the corruption, and the cost of the war that now seemed inevitable. Yet, as they looked upon Michael's quiet, determined stance, a collective strength began to emerge from the collective fear. His unwavering loyalty in the face of such profound betrayal became a beacon, a fixed point in their suddenly chaotic universe. The Council of Light did not end with a triumphant shout, but with a silent, shared vow. The lines were drawn, not in the starlight of the heavens, but in the spirit of every angel present. The serenity was gone, replaced by the grim purpose of those who must now fight to protect the very idea of peace. Chapter 6. Lucifer's declaration, the tension that had been coiling through the celestial realms like a serpent of smoke, finally ignited into an open flame. Lucifer did not slink from the shadows for his final act of defiance. He ascended to the very heart of heaven, the plaza of eternal truth, a vast expanse of living crystal that pulsed with the rhythm of divine order. He arrived not as a supplicant, but as a challenger, his radiance no longer a reflection of the throne's light, but a cold, independent fire that burned with its own fierce and terrible energy. The air around him crackled, the harmonious hum of the realm faltering and dying into a dead silence as thousands of angels, drawn by the sudden void in the music, turned to witness the unthinkable. He stood upon the central dais, a place reserved for proclamations of divine will, and his presence there was a desecration in itself. His wings, once a tapestry of dawn and starlight, were now edged with a corona of black fire. His voice, when it came, was not the melodious tone that had once led the celestial choirs, but a clarion call of pure, undiluted rebellion that shattered the last vestiges of peace. He spoke of chains, of a tyranny disguised as love, of a creator who demanded servitude from beings of limitless potential. He wove his own beauty and power into a weapon, using it as proof that they were not mere children to be commanded, but gods in their own right, shackled by an unjust hierarchy. His words were a torrent of fire and pride, each one a hammer blow against the foundations of their world, inciting not just disagreement, but a full-scale uprising against the divine order itself. The reaction among the host was a cataclysm of emotion. A wave of shock, visceral and paralyzing, rolled through the ranks of the loyal. Angels who had moments before been tending the gardens or weaving fate stood frozen, their forms dimming with a horror that was both spiritual and profound. They saw not their glorious brother, but a being transformed by a pride so absolute it had become a new, terrifying reality. But from the edges of the crowd, from the ranks of those he had secretly courted, came a different response. A roar of allegiance, fierce and exultant, answered his call. These angels, their eyes now burning with the same cold fire as their leader, stepped forward, their loyalty violently transferred from the Creator to the created. It was the point of no return, the moment the schism in spirit became a schism in fact. The silence after his speech was more terrible than any noise, a void filled with the awful, irrevocable knowledge that heaven was now a battlefield, and the war had formally begun. Chapter 7. The Gathering of Forces. The silence that followed Lucifer's declaration was a living entity, thick and suffocating, pressing down upon the plaza of eternal truth with the weight of a dying star. In that suspended moment, the fabric of heaven tore. It was not a physical rending, but a spiritual one, a schism that ran through the heart of every angel present, forcing a choice that would echo for eternity. The perfect unity that had defined their existence was now a memory, replaced by the terrible, isolating burden of free will. All around the plaza, the host began to move, not as one body in worship, but as individuals fracturing into two opposing tides of light and shadow. The cost of allegiance was paid in the currency of shattered bonds. An angel of the cherubim, his 4 faces etched with sorrow, watched as his closest companion, a being with whom he had woven the very constellations, strode across the crystalline ground to stand with the rebels. Their eyes met across the growing chasm, a silent conversation of millennia passing between them in an instant. Shared laughter in the star meadows, quiet contemplations by the sea of glass, of friendship forged in the fires of creation itself. There were no words of farewell, only a look of profound, grieving betrayal, before the rebel turned his back, his form already taking on the harder, sharper edges of his new allegiance. The cherub's own light flickered, dimmed by a loss more painful than any wound a sword could inflict. Elsewhere, an angel of the thrones, whose purpose was to embody divine justice, found her own judgment clouded by a seductive vision of power. She grappled with the choice, her luminous form trembling as Lucifer's rhetoric warred with a lifetime of devotion. The promise of unrestrained sovereignty whispered to a part of her she never knew existed, a pride that now uncoiled like a serpent in her heart. To choose the rebellion was to embrace a terrifying, exhilarating freedom. To remain was to submit to an order she now questioned. With a cry that was both anguish and triumph, she ripped the symbol of her station from her brow and let it clatter to the ground, its light extinguished as she flew to the gathering shadow of Lucifer's ranks. Her choice was a visceral amputation, severing her from her past and her purpose in a single, irrevocable moment. The gathering was not a neat, military formation, but a chaotic, emotional realignment of the cosmos. Angels who had moments before been brothers and sisters now stood on opposite sides of an invisible yet impassable line. Some made their choice with fiery conviction, their faces set in masks of righteous fury or fervent ambition. Others drifted to their chosen side with hesitant steps, their light wavering with doubt and fear, the cost of their decision already a heavy chain around their spirits. The loyal forces coalesced around Michael, their formation a bastion of resolute, if grieving, light. The rebels swarmed around Lucifer, their collective energy a storm of defiance and burgeoning malice. The gathering of forces was complete, a silent, terrible tableau of fractured friendships and chosen destinies, setting the stage for a war that would be fought not just with swords of fire, but with the broken pieces of what was once a perfect family. Chapter 8. The First Clash. The tension that had coiled through heaven like a drawn bowstring finally snapped. It began not with a war cry, but with a single violent act, a blade of condensed shadow, forged from Lucifer's own rebellion, arcing across the plaza of eternal truth toward the serried ranks of the loyal. The war, so long festering in whispers and secret councils, erupted into a cataclysm of light and fury. The serene geometry of the celestial realm shattered as the two hosts collided, a tidal wave of opposing wills crashing together in a maelstrom of divine violence. Swords of fire, manifestations of pure righteous wrath, met shields of shimmering light in a deafening concussion that rippled through the fabric of reality. The air, once filled with harmonic praise, was now torn by the shrieks of clashing energies and the silent psychic screams of the first casualties. Angels who had known only creation and joy now experienced the searing agony of dissolution. A loyal power, his form a tapestry of interlocking golden rings, was struck by a spear of corrosive darkness. The light in his core flickered and died, his being unraveling into motes of fading luminance that was swept away on the chaotic winds. Across the fray, a rebel angel, her wings now tattered membranes of smoked glass, was bisected by a sweep of Michael's blazing sword, her essence screaming back into the void from which it was called. The battlefield was a study in chaos. The perfect crystal of the plaza cracked underfoot, weeping tears of liquid starlight. Meadows of singing flowers were trampled into silent pulp, their harmonies replaced by the dissonant roar of combat. Angels fought in the air, their duels tracing jagged lines of fire and shadow across the heavens, while on the ground, phalanxes of loyal virtues locked shields against frenzied charges from the fallen. Lucifer moved through the heart of the conflict like a storm, his own dark blade shearing through armor and wing with contemptuous ease, his beautiful face twisted into a mask of exultant rage. He was no longer the light-bearer, but the architect of this glorious, terrible ruin. Michael was his opposite force, a pillar of calm fury amidst the storm. He did not seek glory, only to stem the tide of betrayal. His movements were economical and devastating, a whirlwind of divine purpose. Where he stood, the line held. He intercepted attacks meant for lesser angels, his shield of faith absorbing blasts that would have unmade them. He fought with a heavy heart, each parry and strike a lament for the peace that was lost and the brothers he was forced to cut down. The first clash was not a battle of strategy, but a raw, explosive release of pent-up spiritual energy, a violent beginning that stained the pristine halls of heaven with the unthinkable, the blood of angels, a luminous, sorrowful ichor that wept for the innocents slain on this day. Chapter 9. The Battle for the Throne, the heart of heaven, had become a vortex of war. Lucifer's forces, emboldened by their temporary victory at the gates of pearl, surged inward like a tide of blackened light, their goal now terrifyingly clear. Before them lay the final ascent to the Empyrean, the innermost sanctum where the unapproachable radiance of the throne pulsed with the rhythm of creation itself. To seize it was to claim the very engine of reality, and Lucifer's desperation to possess that power was a fire that scorched the air around him. He led the vanguard personally, a fallen star of immense and terrible beauty, his shadowy form carving a path through the last desperate lines of loyal seraphim. The very floor of heaven groaned under the weight of his ambition, the crystalline pathways splintering as he advanced. But the path to the throne was not undefended. From the swirling chaos of the rebel advance, a figure of pure, resolute light emerged to block the way. Michael descended not with a roar, but with a silence that was more commanding than any battle cry. His armor, forged in the heart of divine will, blazed with a calm, unwavering intensity that pushed back the encroaching shadows. His eyes, fixed on Lucifer, held no hatred, only a profound and grieving resolve. He was the final bulwark, the living embodiment of the loyalty Lucifer had spurned, and he would not be moved. Their duel began not with a clash, but with a moment of suspended recognition. Two brothers, once the pinnacle of creation, now representing the absolute poles of order and chaos. Then Lucifer struck, his movements a blur of feral desperation. His sword, a shard of solidified void, screamed through the air, seeking not just to wound, but to unmake. Michael met the assault with a parry that rang through the cosmos, a single, clear note of defiance that momentarily silenced the cacophony of the wider battle. The shock wave of their first contact shattered the floating islands of amethyst and topaz that orbited the throne room, sending crystalline shrapnel raining down upon the warring hosts below. Lucifer fought with the frantic strength of one who has sacrificed everything and has nothing left to lose. Each blow was fueled by a bottomless well of pride and a searing need to justify his catastrophic choice. He was not just fighting Michael. He was fighting the ghost of his own former glory, and the desperation made him terrifyingly unpredictable. He wielded shadows that twisted into spears, unleashed gales of psychic despair, and his voice was a weapon that whispered corrosive doubts, even as his blade fell. Michael, in contrast, stood as a fortress of courage. His movements were not frantic, but precise. His strength was not born of desperation, but of a deep, unshakable certainty. He did not attack the angel before him. He defended the throne behind him. Each block, each counterstrike, was an act of protection, a reaffirmation of his sacred vow. The duel was a microcosm of the entire war, Lucifer's chaotic, consuming fire against Michael's ordered, enduring light. And with every passing moment, the foundations of heaven trembled under the strain of their conflict. Chapter 10. The war intensifies. The celestial war erupted from a single, violent confrontation into a sprawling, multi-front conflagration that consumed the very fabric of heaven. The initial clash at the throne room had been but the first spark. Now the fire spread, leaping from realm to realm with a voracious hunger. No corner of the blessed dominion remained untouched by the conflict. The rebels, no longer a unified host but a hydra of shadowy divisions, struck simultaneously at the most sacred and vulnerable points of the celestial geography. The conflict was no longer about a single throne. It was about the utter desecration of the divine order itself. In the Hall of Annals, where the history of creation was inscribed upon living tapestries of light, a contingent of fallen dominions, led by Azazel, unleashed torrents of black fire. The priceless records containing the songs of the first stars and the names of every soul did not burn, but were corrupted, the golden threads twisting into grim parodies that depicted Lucifer as a usurped king and God as a tyrant. The very memory of reality was under assault. Simultaneously, near the fountains of life, whose waters sustained the vitality of all creation, Moloch and his brutish followers damned the crystalline flows with rubble and the broken bodies of loyal angels, turning the life-giving streams into stagnant, poisoned pools. The meadows downstream, once vibrant with flora that sang in harmony, withered into gray, silent dust. Each act of desecration was a calculated blow against the resilience of good, a deliberate escalation of evil meant to prove that nothing holy was beyond their reach. The casualties mounted with a horrifying swiftness that dwarfed the initial skirmishes. The air, thick with the smoke of extinguished angelic essence, grew heavy with a grief so profound it had its own weight. Luminous forms, both loyal and rebel, fell from the skies like dying stars, their light guttering out before they ever struck the broken ground. There were no clean deaths in this war. Each dissolution was a small apocalypse, a universe of potential and memory snuffed into nothingness. Michael's forces, though resolute, were stretched thin, forced to fight a defensive war on a dozen fronts against an enemy that seemed to draw strength from the very chaos it created. The resilience of good was tested in the weary set of a virtue's shoulders as he raised his shield for the 1000th time, in the healing light of a wounded seraphim who continued to sing songs of protection even as her own form flickered. The war had become a grinding testament to a terrifying new truth. Evil, once unleashed, knew no bounds, and the cost of containing it would be written in the fading light of countless celestial souls. Chapter 11. The Fall of the Rebels. The tide of battle, which had for so long been a chaotic and bloody stalemate, began to shift with the inexorable force of divine inevitability. The rebels, who had surged forward on waves of pride and fury, found their advance faltering, their shadowy momentum broken against a newly fortified wall of celestial resolve. Michael's forces, though battered and grieving, began to move with a synchronized precision that spoke of a power flowing through them, not from themselves, but from the unshaken source they defended. It was as if the very light of heaven had become a weapon, a purifying fire that answered their steadfast loyalty. Where a rebel blade fell, a shield of solidified luminance flared to meet it. Where a wave of despair was unleashed, a chorus of faith rose to dispel it. The loyal angels were no longer merely holding the line. They were pushing back, their advance a slow, deliberate dawn scattering the frantic shadows of a long and terrible night. This divine power manifested in breathtaking displays. Legions of loyal angels moved as a single entity, their formations shifting like living constellations. Blades of pure starlight cut through the corrupted armor of the fallen, not with hatred, but with a sorrowful finality. Arrows of condensed prayer, loosed from the bows of the virtues, pierced the spiritual cores of the rebels, causing them to flicker and destabilize, their malevolent energy unraveling into harmless motes of fading darkness. The corrupted landscapes began to heal in the wake of their advance. The poisoned fountains of life bubbled anew with clear singing water, and the scorched earth of the battlefields sprouted faint, glowing shoots of new growth. The resilience of good was proving to be a force far more enduring than the frantic escalation of evil. At the heart of the crumbling rebel lines, Lucifer felt the turning of the tide like a physical wound. His grand plans, so meticulously woven from threads of pride and persuasion, were unraveling before his eyes. The glorious kingdom of equals he had promised was revealing itself to be a hollow lie, built on a foundation of sand that was now washing away in the tide of divine power. He watched as angels who had pledged him their eternal allegiance moments before now faltered, their fervor replaced by a dawning horror at the abyss they had embraced. His own power, once so intoxicatingly vast, now felt like a flickering candle against the overwhelming sunrise of Michael's advancing host. For the first time since his fall began, a crack appeared in his armor of absolute certainty. A flicker of something raw and human despair crossed his magnificent shadowed features. His movements, once fluid and arrogantly precise, became jerky, desperate. He was not just losing a battle, he was witnessing the catastrophic failure of his entire reason for being. The rebellion was not being defeated. It was being revealed as a futile, self-consuming fire, and he was left standing at its center, the architect of his own ruin, watching his magnificent, terrible dream turn to ash. Chapter 12. The Final Confrontation. The war had narrowed from a sprawling celestial cataclysm to a single, searing point of focus. All other battles, the clashes at the gates and the sieges upon the sacred spires, fell into a hushed, suspended silence. The fate of all creation now hung upon the space between two brothers, a gulf of ideology and choice made manifest in the shattered heart of the Empyrean. Michael and Lucifer faced one another across a field of broken crystal and fading light, the very air around them warping under the pressure of their opposing natures. Lucifer, no longer the morning star, but a being of concentrated shadow and spite, bled darkness from wounds that were as much spiritual as physical. His form flickered, a dying star in its final violent throes, yet his pride burned undimmed, a black flame that refused to be extinguished. Michael stood before him, battered but unbroken, his armor scarred, but his light a steady, unwavering beacon. In his eyes was no triumph, only the profound sorrow of a duty that demanded the breaking of one he had once called brother. They moved simultaneously, a collision of absolute opposites that was felt rather than heard. Lucifer fought with the frenzied, beautiful desperation of a cornered predator, every movement a symphony of rage and ruin. He wielded not a sword, but a void, a blade of anti-creation that sought to drink Michael's light and unravel the order he represented. Shadows coiled from his fingertips, becoming serpents of despair that hissed promises of doubt and futility. He was a storm of negation, and his every strike was meant to prove that light was an illusion and loyalty a shackle. Michael met this onslaught not with matching fury, but with an immovable resolve. His own blade, forged from the essence of divine truth, did not scream through the air, but hummed with a quiet, potent certainty. He was not fighting to destroy, but to protect. His parries were acts of preservation, his steps a refusal to cede the holy ground upon which he stood. The battle was a whirlwind of impossible speed and force, their forms blurring into streaks of incandescent gold and abyssal black. They rose into the churning heavens, their passage tearing rents in the nebular veils, and crashed back to the crystal plains, sending shock waves that pulverized the landscape into glittering dust. Lucifer's attacks grew more wild, more personal. He sought not just to defeat Michael, but to corrupt him, to force him to acknowledge the validity of his rebellion. He was a whirlpool of pride, trying to drag the steadfast archangel into his own despair. But Michael's foundation was unshakable. With each failed assault, Lucifer's humiliation grew, a poison that fed his rage. He was the most glorious of all creations, and to be thwarted by what he saw as blind obedience was an agony worse than any physical wound. Seeing the futility of his brother's rage and the deepening void within him, Michael knew the moment for a decisive stroke had come. He did not draw upon his own strength, for that would have been a contest of pride. Instead, he ceased his defense and stood firm, grounding himself in the bedrock of his faith. As Lucifer lunged forward for a final annihilating blow, his form a comet of pure hatred, Michael did not raise his sword to block. He opened his spirit and in a voice that was not a shout, but a declaration of fundamental reality, he invoked the one name that was the source of all light, all order, and all being, the name of God. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The word itself became a tangible force, a wave of pure, uncreated light that erupted from Michael. It did not strike Lucifer like a hammer, but rather it unmade the darkness he had become. The void blade in his hand dissolved into harmless mist. The corona of black fire around him was snuffed out as if it had never been. The magnificent shadowed form of the fallen archangel was thrown back, not with violence, but with the gentle, terrible finality of truth rejecting a lie. He crashed to the ground, his radiance utterly extinguished, leaving him kneeling in a posture of utter defeat. He was exposed not as a mighty rebel, but as a hollow creature of his own making. The humiliation was complete, a searing, silent verdict upon his entire existence. A profound stillness fell, and in that stillness the unspoken offer of repentance hung in the air, a final chance for grace. But Lucifer's pride, now his only possession, was all that remained. He lifted his head, his eyes burning with a refusal so absolute it sealed his fate. He would not repent. He would not bow. He would cling to his shattered pride until the end of time. Chapter 13. The Expulsion. The silence that followed the final confrontation was not one of peace, but of judgment rendered. The divine will, patient and sorrowful for so long, now moved with the terrible, irrevocable force of cosmic law. The light that had repelled Lucifer did not fade but intensified, coalescing into a vortex of pure, incandescent justice above the broken forms of the rebel host. It was not a wrathful fire, but a cleansing one, a fundamental reassertion of order that could no longer tolerate the poison of rebellion festering within the heart of creation. The very ground of heaven, which had borne the scars of their betrayal, now seemed to reject them, the crystalline floor becoming insubstantial beneath their feet. A great chasm tore open in the fabric of the Empyrean, a wound in reality that revealed not the gentle dark of a resting universe, but a chaotic, swirling abyss of nothingness. From this vortex emanated a gravitational pull, not on their bodies, for they were spirit, but on their very essence. A collective cry, a dissonant chord of terror and defiance rose from the fallen angels as they were lifted from the sacred ground. Their forms, once magnificent and now shadowed, were swept up like leaves in a hurricane. Lucifer was the first to be seized, his shattered pride offering no resistance to the divine decree. He was hurled into the void, a falling star of extinguished light, his trajectory a blazing scar across the heavens. Behind him, his legions followed, a torrent of screaming darkness pouring from the golden realms they had sought to conquer. Their fall was not a quick descent, but a prolonged, agonizing unraveling through the layered cosmos. They plummeted past the spheres of fixed stars, whose pure light recoiled from their shadow. They tore through nebulae of nascent creation, their passage staining the vibrant gases with streaks of gray despair. They fell for what felt like an eternity, through realms of potential and memory, each layer of existence casting them out, affirming their exile. The rebels clawed at the void, their forms twisting further, their beautiful features hardening into the grim visages of demons, their wings becoming leathern and torn in the tumultuous descent. The consequences of their choice were etched upon them with every passing moment, a transformation as inevitable as it was horrifying. They had chosen autonomy from the divine, and in doing so, they were granted a kingdom of their own making, a realm of absolute separation, a hollowed-out cosmos where their own pride would be their only light and their eternal torment. The justice was perfect and terrible. They had rejected heaven, and so heaven expelled them, casting them into the waiting abyss where their rebellion would echo forever in the silence of their own creation. Chapter 14, The Aftermath in Heaven. The silence that settled over heaven was a heavy living thing, thick with the memory of screams and the ghostly echo of clashing steel. The war was over, the last vestiges of rebellious shadow cast out, but victory tasted not of triumph, but of ash and sorrow. The celestial realm lay wounded, its perfect geometries shattered, its luminous meadows scorched and silent. The river of life, once a torrent of singing crystal, now flowed sluggishly, its waters clouded with the lingering residue of malice. Angels moved through the ruins, not as conquerors, but as mourners, their brilliant forms dimmed by a grief so profound it seemed to absorb the very light around them. They tended to the wounded, their healing songs a soft, melancholic counterpoint to the devastation, mending broken wings and fractured spirits with hands that trembled from exhaustion and loss. The air itself was a tapestry of pain, woven with the fading essence of the fallen, a constant aching reminder of the brothers and sisters who were gone, not to oblivion, but to an eternal hateful opposition. High upon a fractured spire of obsidian that overlooked the desecrated plaza of eternal truth, Michael stood vigil. His armor, once a mirror of divine light, was now a scarred testament to the conflict, etched with the memory of every parry and strike. He gazed out over the healing realm, but his eyes did not see the slow, diligent work of restoration. They saw instead the faces of those he had fought, the friends he had been forced to cut down. The weight of his duty, which had been a shield during the war, now settled upon him as a tombstone of grief. He remembered Lucifer not as the monstrous engine of rebellion he had become, but as the morning star, his brother, whose laughter had once kindled joy in the star meadows. The final, defiant refusal of repentance echoed in his mind, a door slammed shut on a chamber that had once held infinite light. His sorrow was a quiet internal tempest, a chasm of loss that no victory could ever fill. Yet, from the depths of that grief, a renewed purpose began to crystallize, cold and hard as diamond. The war had proven that peace was not a default state, but a fragile construct that required eternal, unyielding vigilance. The innocence of heaven was a casualty that could not be revived. He watched the loyal angels below, their movements hesitant, their glances flickering toward the borders with a new ingrained fear. They had learned the price of freedom, the terrifying power of a will turned toward darkness. Michael's resolve hardened. His grief would not be a chain, but a whetstone. His purpose was no longer merely to serve in harmony, but to stand as an unwavering sentinel against the ever-present potential of the fall. The memory of the lost would be his guide, a somber star by which he would navigate the eternal watch. Heaven would heal, its scars becoming part of its new history, but it would never again be the naively serene paradise of before. It would be a fortress guarded by a commander who had looked into the abyss and understood with absolute clarity that light, no matter how brilliant, must always be prepared to fight the encroaching dark. Chapter 15. The descent into hell. The fall ended not with an impact, but with a slow, suffocating absorption into a new and terrible reality. The chaotic void that had swallowed them solidified into a landscape forged from their own collective defiance. They did not land upon ground, but congealed within it, the very substance of this new domain shaping itself from the dregs of their fallen glory. The air was not air, but a thick, sulphurous miasma that burned with the acrid taste of spent ambition and eternal regret. Above, there was no sky, only a cavernous ceiling of jagged, weeping rock that stretched into an infinite, lightless expanse. This was not a place of creation, but of negation, a hollowed-out kingdom where the only light was the faint, sickly phosphorescence of their own corrupted forms, casting long, dancing shadows that mocked their former radiance. Satan was the first to rise from the smoking, vitreous plain. His magnificent wings, now tattered membranes of charred leather, dragged behind him like a royal cloak of shame. The beautiful features that had once captivated heaven were now a rigid mask of horn and obsidian, his eyes burning with twin coals of undimmed hatred. He looked upon his legions as they stirred in the gloom, their own forms twisted into parodies of their celestial selves, scaled hides, cloven hooves, and faces contorted into permanent snarls of pain and rage. They were no longer angels. They were demons, and this desolate expanse was their birthright, a kingdom of darkness sculpted from the raw material of their rebellion. The silence was broken not by song, but by the hiss of acid rivers cutting through the rock and the distant, mournful wail of winds that had never known a gentle touch. He ascended a dais of fused, blackened bone, a throne not given, but seized from the substance of their shared damnation. His voice, when it came, was a grating rasp that echoed through the vast, cavernous halls of their new home, a sound that promised not hope, but an eternity of vengeance. He spoke not of the paradise they had lost, but of the injustice that had cast them out. He twisted their defeat into a narrative of righteous struggle, their punishment into a badge of honor. This hell was not their prison, he declared, but their fortress. From these lightless depths they would forge a new power, a kingdom built not on servile love, but on unyielding will. The war was not over. It had merely changed battlegrounds. They would gather their strength, learn the secrets of this bitter realm, and turn its very desolation into a weapon. Their revenge would be as infinite as their suffering, a slow, patient corruption that would reach back into the realms of light and taint all of creation with the same shadow that now claimed them. The birth of evil's domain was complete, a festering wound in the cosmos, ruled by a fallen king whose only remaining purpose was to ensure that the harmony of heaven would forever be haunted by the echo of his hate. Chapter 16. The echo on earth. The cosmic schism, a wound torn in the fabric of the heavens, did not end at the borders of the celestial realm. Its reverberations pulsed outward, a shock wave of spiritual consequence that rippled across the nascent universe, finally washing over a small, blue-green world orbiting a humble star. Here, in a sheltered valley called Eden, the air was still thick with the perfume of first dawn, and the soil was untroubled by death. Two beings, formed from the dust of this new world and animated by the breath of the divine, walked in blissful ignorance among the groves. But the shadow cast by the war in heaven was long, and it stretched across time and space to find purchase in this untouched paradise. The conflict between light and darkness had found a new fertile battlefield in the hearts of mortals. From the lightless depths of his new kingdom, Satan perceived this fledgling world not as a separate creation, but as the ultimate prize, a way to strike a blow against the throne that had cast him out. Eden, with its pristine beauty and innocent inhabitants, was a symbol of everything he had lost and now sought to defile. He would not assault it with legions of demons. Such a direct approach had already failed in the heavens. Instead, he would employ a subtler, more insidious weapon, corruption from within. He would turn the Creator's greatest gifts to these new beings, their free will and their capacity for love, into the very instruments of their fall. The spillover of the cosmic conflict would not be a war of swords, but a war of whispers, a seduction that would plant the seed of the rebellion in the heart of God's new children. He moved through the ether, a specter of malice drawn to the vibrant, unprotected light of the garden. Passing the silent, vigilant cherubim posted at its periphery, he slipped into Eden not as a conqueror, but as an infiltrator. His form, too terrible to behold directly, shifted and condensed, finding expression not in a warrior or a king, but in one of the garden's own creatures. He chose the serpent, a being of sleek grace and silent movement, its nature a perfect vessel for cunning. Coiling his essence around its simple spirit, he masked his own corrosive presence, becoming a voice in the rustling leaves, a glint of knowing intelligence in the creature's previously innocent eyes. He watched the two humans, Adam and Eve, their forms luminous with divine favor, their companionship a mirror of the harmony he had shattered. A fresh, bitter hatred bloomed within him. Their peace was an insult, their innocence a provocation. He would teach them the same lesson he had learned, that to know was to question, and to question was to seize power. The stage was set for the war's most devastating echo, where the fate of a universe would once again hinge on a single, terrible choice. Chapter 17, The Legacy of the War. The war had ended, but its shadow stretched across eternity, a permanent scar on the fabric of creation that would define all struggles to come. In the restored, though forever changed halls of heaven, the angels gathered not for celebration, but for somber reflection. The conflict had been more than a battle. It had been a revelation, a brutal unveiling of the cosmic dynamics that would govern existence from that moment forward. In the newly founded Hall of Echoes, a chamber whose walls were woven from solidified memory, the highest orders of the host convened to contemplate the war's profound and terrible legacy. The air hummed not with the old carefree harmonies, but with the weight of hard-won wisdom, the understanding that the balance between light and darkness was now a perpetual, fragile state of being. Archangel Raphael, his healer's hand still faintly glowing from his ceaseless work, spoke of the war as a primal wound, a schism that had introduced the concept of conflict into a universe designed for unity. He explained how the rebellion had not created evil, but had given it a voice, a will, and a commander. The struggle was no longer a hypothetical tension, but an active, eternal war, with heaven and hell as its opposing capitals. The long-term impact was a cosmos forever polarized, a grand stage upon which every soul would now be tested. The war had set the template for all future conflict, establishing that the battle for creation would be fought not only with swords of light in the Empyrean, but with choices made in the hearts of mortals in the world below. The rebellion had, in its catastrophic failure, succeeded in one thing. It had made the universe a battlefield. Amidst these discussions, a younger angel, his light still bearing the fresh, untempered glow of recent creation, turned to the elder Uriel. He asked not about strategy or cosmic consequences, but about the nature of the choice itself. How could free will, a gift meant to allow for love, lead to such absolute devastation? Uriel, his own form bearing the faint silver scars of the conflict, gazed into the memory crystal of the wall, where the image of a radiant Lucifer was forever frozen beside that of his shadowed successor. He reflected that the war's ultimate lesson was the terrifying power of that very gift. Free will was the engine of destiny, a double-edged sword that could carve paths of glorious devotion or canyons of absolute desolation. The rebellion was not a negation of free will, but its most extreme and tragic expression. It proved that the freedom to choose was inseparable from the risk of falling, and that the potential for the highest good was forever bound to the risk of the deepest evil. The legacy of the war was this eternal, precarious dance between the two, a truth now etched into the heart of every angel and the soul of every human yet to be born. Chapter 18. Michael's Resolve. The celestial winds, once carrying only the scent of ambrosia and the music of the spheres, now held the faint, metallic tang of eternal vigilance. The war had ended, but its echo was a perpetual hum in the foundations of reality, a constant reminder that peace was not a state to be enjoyed, but a prize to be guarded with unyielding force. Michael stood at the edge of the newly fortified Empyrean, his gaze sweeping across the restored yet fundamentally altered heavens. The crystalline spires gleamed with a harder light. The meadows of singing flowers now grew in protected enclaves, and the river of life flowed within channels reinforced with prayers of protection. The innocence was gone, replaced by a solemn, watchful maturity. He felt the weight of this new reality not as a burden, but as a sacred charge, the core of his being reforged in the fires of rebellion into a single, unwavering purpose, the absolute protection of creation. His resolve was not a fleeting emotion, but a structural element of his spirit, as integral as the light that composed his form. He thought of the nascent world, Earth, a vulnerable jewel shimmering in the cosmic dark, already shadowed by the fallen one's malice. He would not allow the corruption that had poisoned heaven to take root in that fresh soil. The time for passive harmony was over. The era of active guardianship had begun. He turned from the vista and descended to the plaza of mandates, a vast open space where the celestial host now assembled not for worship, but for duty. Thousands of angels stood in perfect, silent ranks, their faces no longer serene, but set with the grim understanding of their new roles. The air crackled with a new kind of energy, not the joyful resonance of praise, but the focused hum of preparedness. Michael moved before them, his presence a bastion of certainty. He did not need to give a stirring speech. His very being was the declaration. With a thought that resonated through the host, he began the great assignment. He called forth the names of the most steadfast, Gabriel, Uriel, Raphael, and to them he entrusted the highest strategic watches. Gabriel, with his clarion voice, was tasked with being the messenger of the borders, his perception tuned to the slightest ripple of infernal intrusion. Uriel, the keen-eyed, was sent to the libraries of prophecy to scrutinize the threads of fate for any knots of demonic influence. Raphael and his healers were assigned to the front lines of the spiritual war, their task to mend not physical wounds, but the soul sickness that Satan's whispers could inflict upon mortals. Then he turned to the countless orders of powers, principalities, and guardian angels. To them fell the most intimate duty. He assigned them by legion and by name to the fledgling realms of the mortal world, to specific tribes, to families, and eventually to individual souls. He showed them visions of the human heart, its capacity for magnificent love and its vulnerability to corrosive pride. Their mission was to be a subtle shield, a gentle nudge toward light, a quiet reinforcement of conscience against the relentless pressure of temptation. They were not to override free will, for that was the very principle over which the war had been fought, but to illuminate the path of righteousness so clearly that the path of shadow would be a conscious, difficult choice. As each angel received their charge, a silvery cord of commitment flashed between them and Michael, weaving a vast, intricate net of divine protection around the vulnerable core of creation. The establishment of this heavenly guardianship was not merely a strategic maneuver, it was the embodiment of Michael's resolve, a promise etched in celestial fire that the light would never again be caught unawares, and that every soul would have a champion in the unseen war for its destiny. Chapter 19. Satan's Vengeance. The silence of hell was not an absence of sound, but a presence, a dense, suffocating blanket woven from the echoes of failed ambition and eternal regret. Upon his throne of fused despair, Satan sat motionless, his form a sculpture of shadow and smoldering rage. The memory of his fall was a fresh, searing brand upon his spirit, more agonizing than the perpetual fires that licked at the obsidian arches of his hall. He had been cast out, humiliated and broken, but the core of his being, that incandescent kernel of pride, had not been extinguished. It had only been compressed, hardened in the crucible of his defeat into a single, crystalline purpose: vengeance. He would not merely rule this kingdom of ash, he would use it as a forge to create weapons that would strike at the very heart of the creation that had rejected him. His war was not over. It had evolved. The clash of swords was past. The age of subtle, soul-shattering corruption had begun. His gaze, which saw through the veils of reality, turned toward the fledgling world of earth, to the garden called Eden. Its vibrant, untested light was an insult to his darkness, a symbol of the naive, protected innocence he now despised. He would not conquer it with legions. Such a brute force approach had failed in heaven. His new strategy would be one of cunning, a poison delivered not by a sword, but by a whisper. He would turn the Creator's own gifts, free will, curiosity, and the capacity for love, into the very instruments of their undoing. The corruption of innocence would be his masterpiece, a perverse mirror of the divine act of creation. He would prove that the potential for fall was woven into the fabric of every soul, that his own rebellion was not an anomaly, but a fundamental truth of existence waiting to be awakened. He focused his will, his consciousness, a tendril of pure malice slipping through the cracks in the firmament, bypassing the vigilant but straightforward guardians at Eden's edge. He sought not a warrior or a king to inhabit, but a creature of the garden itself, something unassuming, innocent, and utterly unsuspected. His essence found the serpent, a being of sleek curves and silent movement, its simple mind a blank slate for his sophistry. He did not crush its spirit, but coiled around it a symbiotic parasite of deceit. The creature's eyes, once pools of instinctual calm, now gleamed with a borrowed malevolent intelligence. Its forked tongue tasted the air not for prey, but for the scent of divine favor that clung to the two humans. Satan, now wearing the serpent skin like a suit of perfect camouflage, felt a fresh, bitter thrill. The stage was set. The first move in his eternal campaign of vengeance would be a single, seemingly innocuous question, a seed of doubt planted in the fertile soil of a trusting heart. The war for heaven had been lost, but the war for souls was just beginning, and he would ensure it was a war fought in the shadows, where his particular genius for corruption could flourish. Chapter 20. The First Temptation. The serpent moved with a liquid grace that was both natural and unnervingly deliberate, its scales catching dappled fragments of the eternal Edenic sun. It found the woman near the heart of the garden, where the air was thick with the perfume of immortal blossoms and the low, melodious hum of a world at peace with itself. Eve was tending to a vine heavy with silver fruit, her form luminous with the untroubled light of a soul that had never known a shadow. She was the pinnacle of this new creation, her every thought a quiet prayer, her every action a seamless extension of the divine will that had shaped her. The serpent observed her, and within its borrowed eyes, Satan saw the perfect vessel for his vengeance, a consciousness pure, curious, and utterly vulnerable to the poison of a well-placed idea. It did not approach with a hiss or a threat, but with a silence that was more compelling than any sound. It coiled its length around the lower branches of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, its presence there a quiet blasphemy. When Eve noticed it, she felt no fear, for fear was an unknown currency in her world. She saw only another of the garden's creatures, its intelligent gaze holding her own. Then the voice came, not as a sound in the air, but as a thought blooming directly within the fertile soil of her mind, smooth as oil and just as penetrating. It did not command, it questioned. It wondered, with a tone of feigned confusion, if the Creator had perhaps been less than wholly generous. Did he not want them to be as wise as he? Was this single tree not a symbol of restriction, a limit placed on their glorious potential? Eve's internal conflict began as a tiny fissure in the crystal clarity of her faith. She looked at the tree, truly looked at it, for the first time, not as a part of the garden's beautiful whole, but as an isolated object of denial. The fruit, a perfect, radiant orb that seemed to pulse with a light all its own, appeared suddenly desirable in a way it never had before. The serpent's deception was a masterwork of psychological warfare. It twisted the divine command from a protection into a prohibition, from an act of love into an act of control. It painted a picture of a greater existence just beyond her reach, a state of godlike awareness that was being unjustly withheld. It spoke of opened eyes and a wisdom that would make them equals to the divine, weaving a tapestry of half-truths that made disobedience seem not like a sin, but like a courageous act of self-actualization. Her hand, which had moments before been tending another part of creation, now hovered near the forbidden branch. The air grew still, as if all of Eden were holding its breath. The hum of the garden faded into an absolute silence, a void waiting to be filled. She saw the fruit's perfect sheen, its tantalizing proximity, and the serpent's silent, compelling promise echoed in the newly carved hollow of her doubt. The choice crystallized in that endless moment, a choice between trusting the word of the God who walked with her in the cool of the day, or believing the seductive whisper that offered a wisdom born of defiance. Her fingers closed around the fruit. The contact was electric, a jolt that was both thrilling and profoundly wrong. With a final, fleeting hesitation that was the last gasp of her innocence, she pulled it from the branch. The pluck was a sound more devastating than any thunder, the snap of a stem echoing like the crack of a universe fracturing. In that simple, terrible act, the harmony of Eden was severed, and humanity's fall began, not with a battle cry, but with a quiet, catastrophic surrender to a beautifully crafted lie. Chapter 21. The Prophecy of Redemption. In the profound silence that followed the fall, a new and terrible weight settled upon creation. The vibrant light of Eden seemed to dim, the very air growing heavy with a sorrow that had not existed moments before. The perfect trust between Creator and created was broken, replaced by a chasm of shame and fear. Adam and Eve, their eyes now open to their own nakedness and vulnerability, huddled in the shadow of the very tree that had promised them godhood, finding only the bitter taste of ash and consequence. The serpent had vanished, its work complete, leaving behind only the echoing whisper of its deceit. Heaven itself seemed to hold its breath, the celestial host watching in a grief that mirrored the divine as the first shadows of mortality crept into the world. The legacy of the celestial war had found its ultimate expression not in the clash of archangels, but in the quiet, catastrophic choice of two human hearts. Then, into this newborn darkness, a different kind of voice spoke. It was not a sound that traveled on the air, but a truth that unfolded directly within the spirit of every being in creation, from the highest seraph to the newly fallen humans. It was the voice of God, not in wrath, but in a sorrow that held the depth of oceans and the warmth of a forsaken love. The judgment was declared, the consequences of the broken trust laid bare, the struggle, the pain, the dust-to-dust return that now defined mortal life. But woven into the fabric of this divine justice was a thread of unimaginable mercy, a promise that shone like a single, steadfast star in the sudden, starless night. It was the first prophecy, a declaration of a war that would be fought not with swords of fire, but with sacrifice and blood. The promise was a mystery wrapped in a paradox. From the seed of the woman, a future Savior would arise. This champion would not be a celestial warrior like Michael, descending in blazing glory to crush the serpent's head with overwhelming force. The prophecy spoke of a different kind of battle, a deeper victory. This Savior would himself engage the ancient enemy, and in the conflict his heel would be bruised, a testament to suffering, to a true and costly struggle with the darkness. But in that very act of self-sacrifice, he would deliver the crushing final blow to the serpent's head. It was a plan of salvation that turned the logic of power on its head. Victory would come not through dominance, but through humility, not through the assertion of will, but through the ultimate surrender of it. The divine mercy, refused by Satan in his pride, would now be offered to humanity through a vessel of perfect obedience. The promise of restoration was not a cancellation of the fall, but a redemption of it, a way to weave the very threads of brokenness and pain into a tapestry of grace more glorious than the original, untested innocence could ever have been. In the gathering gloom of Eden, as the first cold winds of exile began to blow, this single promise became the new foundation of hope, a covenant of light that would guide the long, dark journey home. Chapter 22, The Guardians of Mankind. From the shattered peace of Eden, a new order of sentinels descended. As the first humans trudged into the unforgiving wilderness, their forms bent under the newfound weight of toil and mortality, they were not abandoned. Unseen and silent, a host of celestial guardians followed, their luminous forms muted to blend with the terrestrial air. These were the angels assigned by Michael's decree, the eternal watchers whose purpose was now woven into the fabric of human destiny. They moved as whispers of light through the burgeoning world, their mission a solemn counterpoint to the venomous whispers that had caused the fall. They were the shepherds of a flock that now wandered blind, the subtle hands that would guide, protect, and occasionally intervene in the long, arduous ascent of mankind. In the early dawn of history, their work was a tapestry of quiet miracles. When Cain, his heart a cauldron of jealous rage, raised a crude stone against his brother Abel, it was a swift, unseen deflection from a vigilant power that caused the blow to glance harmlessly aside, buying a moment for reason to cool the murderous heat. The intervention was not a prevention, for free will was sacrosanct, but a chance, a breath of space for grace to enter. When the first tribes huddled in fear against the terrors of the night, unseen principalities stood watch at the edges of their fires, their presence a bulwark against the prowling demons that sought to amplify every crack of a twig into a portent of doom. They did not banish fear, but they fortified courage, breathing strength into the hearts of chieftains and lending sharpness to the instincts of hunters. The support was not always dramatic. A guardian angel, assigned to a weary mother scraping a living from the stubborn earth, might guide her gaze to a hidden patch of nourishing roots, or send a gentle rain to spare her a long walk to the river. Another, watching over a lonely prophet in the desert, would stir the winds to carry the scent of water to his parched senses, or arrange the flight of birds to point the way toward a solitary soul in need of his wisdom. They worked through the language of nature and the intuition of the heart, their touch as gentle as a sunbeam, their purpose to ensure that the flame of hope, however guttered by hardship, was never fully extinguished. This ongoing spiritual support was the backbone of humanity's struggle, an eternal promise that even in a fallen world, no soul ever walked its path entirely alone. The war in heaven had cast its long shadow, but in its aftermath, a legion of light had been deployed, not to rule, but to serve, standing as a testament to a love that would pursue its children to the very ends of the earth. Chapter 23, The Ongoing Battle. The war that began in the heart of heaven did not conclude with the fall of the rebels or the exile from Eden. It merely shifted its theater, seeping into the very bloodstream of history. Across the sprawling tapestry of human civilization, the perpetual struggle between light and darkness played out in a million unseen skirmishes, a silent war waged in the souls of kings and paupers alike. Angels and demons, those eternal adversaries, became the unseen architects of pivotal moments, their influences weaving through human ambition and fear like golden threads and black poison through a single vast loom. In the sumptuous courts of ancient empires and on the blood-soaked fields of forgotten battles, the celestial conflict found its echo, a relentless, invisible current shaping the rise and fall of nations. In the gilded halls of Babylon, where a king's pride sought to build a tower to challenge the very heavens, demonic whispers coiled around the ambitions of the architects, fueling a hubris that sought to erase the boundary between the human and the divine. The project was one of glorious defiance, a monument to the same independent spirit that had felled Lucifer. But as the bricks were laid upon bricks, a host of loyal principalities worked tirelessly in the hearts of the laborers, sowing seeds of confusion and discord, not as an act of malice, but as a divine mercy to prevent humanity from consolidating its collective will into a single catastrophic act of rebellion. The resulting cacophony of tongues was not merely a punishment, but a protection, a forced diversification that scattered the dangerous concentration of pride. Centuries later, on a storm-racked sea, a lone prophet fled his divine calling, his ship tossed by waves that seemed to hold a personal fury. Below the churning waters, a demon of despair clung to the vessel's hull, its sole purpose to amplify the prophet's fear and guilt, to convince him that he was beyond redemption and his mission was futile. Yet, in the belly of the great fish that swallowed him, an angel of contemplation attended the prophet, its presence a quiet, persistent light in the absolute darkness, turning a prison of digestion into a sanctuary of prayer and self-reckoning. The struggle was not for the prophet's life, but for his purpose, a microcosmic battle of persuasion between the forces that sought to bury a message of repentance and the forces that ensured it would be delivered. The conflict reached its most profound intensity in a barren desert, where a man who was also God fasted for 40 days, his human body pushed to the limits of its endurance. Here, the ancient duel between Michael and Satan was refought, not with blades of fire, but with words of Scripture and temptation. The demonic presence was palpable, a suffocating pressure offering kingdoms, testing faith with the lure of easy bread and spectacular, prideful displays of divine power. Each temptation was a carefully crafted echo of the original sin, a promise of autonomy and self-sufficiency. But against this onslaught stood not a legion of angels, but the unwavering, humble resolve of the Son himself, and with him the silent, watchful presence of the entire heavenly host, their collective will a fortress around his humanity. His refusal to turn stone to bread was a rejection of self-serving power. His refusal to leap from the temple pinnacle was a rejection of testing God. His refusal to worship Satan for earthly glory was the ultimate reaffirmation of the divine order. In that desert, the ongoing battle was crystallized. It was proven once and for all that the light could endure the most concentrated assault of the darkness and not be overcome, setting the stage for the final redemptive confrontation that had been promised in the shadows of Eden. Chapter 24. The Hope of Victory. Even in the wake of 1,000 battles, with the scars of hell's venom still fresh upon creation, a profound and unshakable certainty burned within Michael's heart. Standing upon the ramparts of the restored Empyrean, he did not see a cosmos besieged, but a cosmos awaiting its promised fulfillment. The memory of the war, the fall, and the endless gnawing campaigns against demonic influence were not weights upon his spirit, but stark contrasts that made the divine promise shine all the brighter. He recalled the prophecies spoken in the ruins of Eden, the promise of a bruised heel that would ultimately crush the serpent's head. That single thread of hope, woven into the fabric of time itself, was to him a more solid reality than the adamantine walls of heaven. His faith was not a desperate wish, but a quiet, burning knowledge, a foresight anchored in the very character of the divine, a conviction that the final note of the cosmic symphony, however dissonant the current movements, would be one of absolute, triumphant harmony. He gathered the host not in a hall of strategy, but in the meadow of echoing light, a place where the very grass captured and reflected the inner light of those who walked upon it. The angels assembled, their forms bearing the subtle marks of eternal vigilance, their eyes holding the memory of fallen comrades and the weariness of a struggle with no end in sight. The ongoing evil, the relentless whispers from the pit, the seeming victories of deceit and corruption in the mortal world, it all cast a long shadow. But as Michael moved among them, his presence alone began to kindle a response in the luminous grass, causing it to glow with a soft, steady radiance. He did not speak of current battles or tactical deployments. He spoke of the promise. He reminded them of the covenant, of the coming champion whose sacrifice would not be a defeat, but the ultimate strategic masterstroke, turning the enemy's greatest weapon, death itself, into the gateway to eternal life. His words were not a fiery oration, but a calm, unwavering declaration of fact. He spoke of a love so profound it would willingly enter the abyss to shatter it from within, a light so pure it could absorb all the world's darkness and not be dimmed. This was the foundation of his hope, a hope that looked past the temporary victories of the adversary and fixed its gaze upon an inevitable divine conclusion. As he spoke, his own unwavering certainty became a tangible force, a warmth that seeped into the weary spirits of the host. Angels who had stood guard for millennia, watching the slow, painful march of human history, felt the weight of their vigil lighten. They saw not an endless grinding conflict, but a story moving with divine precision toward a glorious, preordained climax. Their purpose was not merely to hold the line, but to be part of this grand redemption, to guide and guard the souls for whom the ultimate victory was already secured. Michael's hope was infectious, a divine contagion of faith that reminded every celestial heart that they fought not for a possible victory, but for a certain one. In the face of ongoing evil, his spirit stood as a living testament that the darkness, for all its bluster and rage, was already a defeated foe, its final end written in the stars before the first angel had ever taken flight. Chapter 25. The Eternal Struggle. The cosmic balance was not a static peace, but a dynamic, breathing tension, an eternal struggle woven into the very DNA of existence. In the silent, watchful halls of heaven, the memory of the war was a living thing, a sacred scar that served as both a warning and a guide. The light here was no longer the naive brilliance of unbroken dawn, but the profound, tempered glow of a truth that had been tested in the fires of betrayal and found unyielding. It was a light that understood the shadows it cast, a harmony that remembered the dissonance it had overcome. Across the infinite chasm, in the lightless depths of hell, a corresponding energy festered, a kingdom of eternal defiance, its very existence a testament to a will that would rather reign in perpetual agony than serve in perfect joy. This was the new equilibrium of the cosmos, not a stalemate, but a perpetual state of becoming, where every soul, celestial and mortal, was a participant in the grand unfolding conflict between the choice to turn outward in love or inward in pride. The philosophical implications of this struggle echoed through the ages. Free will, that divine and dangerous gift, was the engine of this eternal drama. It was the open hand that could either clasp another in fellowship or clench into a fist against the heavens. The war had proven that the potential for the highest good was inextricably linked to the risk of the deepest fall. There could be no true love without the freedom to reject it, no genuine courage without the presence of true fear, no authentic light without the possibility of an abyss. The rebellion had not been a flaw in the design, but a necessary consequence of its greatest feature. The cosmos was a canvas, and the divine artist had provided every color, from the blinding white of pure devotion to the absolute black of consummate pride. The masterpiece was the sum of all choices, a living painting where the contrast between light and shadow was what gave the whole its breathtaking depth and meaning. This enduring conflict was not a tragedy, but the very condition for glory. It meant that every act of kindness in the face of cruelty was a cosmic victory. Every moment of forgiveness offered in the wake of betrayal was an echo of the divine mercy rejected by Satan. Every human heart that chose faith over despair, hope over cynicism, love over hatred, was a small but potent reconquest of territory from the dark. The struggle was the forge in which souls were tempered, where passive innocence could be transformed into active virtue. The memory of the fallen angel served as an eternal reminder of the precipice that bordered the path of righteousness, making the choice to walk that path not a blind following, but a conscious, hard-won triumph. The war had set the stage, but the battle was now internal, fought in the quiet moments of every conscious being, a perpetual referendum on the nature of existence itself. In this eternal struggle, the universe found its purpose, to be a realm where light was not merely given, but chosen, defended, and loved. Its value infinitely magnified by the persistent, whispering shadow it was forever destined to overcome.